be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Now a man was ill, Lazarus from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who had anointed the Lord with perfumed oil and dried his feet with her hair. It was her brother Lazarus who was ill. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, saying, Master, the one you love is ill. When Jesus heard this, he said, This illness is not to end in death, but is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was ill, he remained for 2 days in the place where he was. Then after this he said to his disciples, Let us go back to Judea. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just trying to stone you, and you want to go back there? Jesus answered, Are there not 12 hours in a day? If one walks during the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if one walks at night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him. He said this and then told them, Our friend Lazarus is asleep, but I am going to awaken him. So the disciples said to him, Master, if he is asleep, he will be saved. But Jesus was talking about his death, while they thought he meant ordinary sleep. So then Jesus said to them clearly, Lazarus has died, and I am glad for you that I was not there, that you may believe. Let us go to him. So Thomas, called Didymus, said to his fellow disciples, Let us also go to die with him. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, only about 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, but Mary sat at home. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, Your brother will rise. Martha said to him, I know he will rise in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus told her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, even if he dies, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, Yes, Lord. I have come to believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, the one who is coming into the world. When she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary secretly, saying, The teacher is here and is asking for you. As soon as she heard this, she rose quickly and went to him. For Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still where Martha had met him. So, when the Jews who were with her in the house comforting her saw Mary get up quickly and go out, they followed her, presuming that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her weeping, he became perturbed and deeply troubled and said, Where have you laid him? They said to him, Sir, come and see. And Jesus wept. So the Jews said, See how he loved him. But some of them said, Could not the one who opened the eyes of the blind man have done something so that this man would not have died? So Jesus, perturbed again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay across it. Jesus said, Take away the stone. Martha, the dead man's sister, said to him, Lord, by now there will be a stench. He has been dead for 4 days. Jesus said to her, Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. And Jesus raised his eyes and said, Father, I thank you for hearing me. I know that you always hear me, but because of the crowd here I have said this, that they may believe that you sent me. And when he had said this, he cried out in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, tied hand and foot with burial bands, and his face was wrapped in a cloth. So Jesus said to them, "Untie him and let him go." Now many of the Jews who had come to Mary and seen what he had done began to believe in him. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
And what there is to conquer by strength and submission has already been discovered once or twice or several times by men whom one cannot hope to emulate. But there is no competition. There is only the fight to recover what has been lost and found and lost again and again, and now under conditions that seem unpropitious. But perhaps neither gain nor loss. For us, there is only the trying. It's sometimes hard for me to believe that it's been 13 years since I was an undergraduate student here at the University of Dallas. When I was a sophomore in 2006, two seniors that year, some of whose names you may recognize, Tommy Hine and John Rhodes, they made a video highlighting the strengths of the University of Dallas on their own time and on their own money. And they used the quote that I just quoted from T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets to highlight the unique and special place that the liberal arts has here at UD. What is gained, what is lost, what is revealed, what is obscured. Any good student of history, especially any student of church history, will know that over the centuries, it's not as though we ever stop believing what is fully true, but over the course of political and societal changes, we might emphasize one part of the faith to the detriment of another, only to centuries later recognize, reappropriate, and bring that maybe hidden part of our faith back into the life of the church. We also experience this relationship particularly in sacred arts and in sacred music, obscurity and revealing, what is gained and what is lost. Now, I have to admit, I hesitate to talk about sacred art and sacred music because I know there are here among us people who know a lot more about sacred art and music than I do. For example, at the 11 o'clock Mass, there was present Dr. Lyle Novinsky, who taught here for many, many years. So he's not here right now, so I feel a little more confident than I did at the 11 o'clock Mass. It probably goes without saying, probably a bit obvious. We don't really quite think about it this way, but it makes sense. Sacred art obviously reveals something. It shows us, it reminds us aspects of our faith that we might easily forget. It reveals to us people, events in the lives of the saints, events in sacred scripture, the resurrection, the crucifixion, Christ walking on the water. But I would also say that sacred art, as much as it reveals, sacred art, however good or abstract or realistic it might be, also obscures. Something is lost in that expression. Whatever is present, there is also something that is absent. Whatever is seen, there is also something that is overlooked. Or think of it like this. UD students, or if you have been to Rome and been to Assisi, think back to what you saw in that crypt church in the Basilica of St. Francis. One of the painters who painted those frescoes on the walls, his name was Giotto, you may remember. He was a 14th century Italian painter. Giotto was still working in the sort of medieval school of depicting people. The figures that he paints are very stylized. They're very sort of perfect. The religious symbolism is rather clear in his paintings. There's this sort of cruciform halo above Christ's head, so you know it's Jesus. The religious symbolism is pretty obvious. You know who Mary is. You know who St. Peter is. You know who the centurion is. There's a clear focal point. The sacred figures in his paintings are often blatant, sort of hitting you in the face. This is who Christ is. This is who the woman wiping Jesus' feet with her hair and her tears. This is who they are. And there is not a whole lot of shadow. Everything is light. You see the figures in the foreground, but you also see the figures in the background. There's not a whole lot of darkness. You can see the figures out in the trees and in the cities beyond. Now fast forward a couple of centuries and consider someone like Caravaggio. Caravaggio depicted sacred realities through a very gritty lens. He used perhaps figures who didn't have the most morally upright lives to depict people like Christ and the Blessed Mother. He doesn't use very clear religious symbolism the way his predecessors did. You might see a faint halo around the head of Christ or the Blessed Mother, but it's barely even there. You have to know the symbolism so that you can understand his meaning. And of course, Caravaggio, perhaps most notably different from Giotto centuries before, not all is light. There is a lot of darkness in a lot of his paintings. And in fact, in some of his paintings, there is more darkness than there is light. Now, both of these painters, in their sacred art, reveal something. There is a strength in both, and many more. But even in, however good their depiction might be, there is also something that is obscured. Something is lost. Whatever is present, there is also something that is absent. It's probably a bit obvious that you have noticed some of the sacred images here in the church are veiled, and this is an option that the church gives us these last few days of Lent, to veil sacred images in the church. This, in one way, is a recognition that art, for Catholics, is crucial. It's important. It has a very prominent role in our lived faith, and that art can only go so far. It is limited. It is finite. Just in the sacred liturgy, as there is a time for sacred music to cease and be quiet so that we can enjoy the silence and delve into the silence, there is also a time, these days, for images to take a back seat, for images to be veiled. If you will, it's a sort of physical genuflection. It's a sort of visible acknowledgement to silence before the mysteries that they depict, the crucifixion and others. They depict the faith, and they acknowledge that faith, that they are not that fullness. But is that all? Or is there something else? Jesus answered, "If one walks during the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if one walks at night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him." It should go without saying that Christ is not talking about literal light. He's not talking about the sun or candles or electricity. He is talking about the inner light, the Spirit of Christ, as St. Paul spoke in his letter to the Romans. He's talking about his light, which helps us illumine our lives so that we can walk and discern his will as we go about our daily business. So perhaps the obvious question then is, well, how? How do we see with the eyes of Christ? How do we see with his light? The answer is probably a bit paradoxical. We see by Christ's light through silence. We see it through abstinence. We see with the light of Christ by becoming blind. Last week, you may or may not remember that the Gospel was also taken from the Gospel of John. It was the healing of sight to the man who was born blind. One of the truths of that Gospel is that for us to see clearly, for us to see with the eyes of Christ, we must let Christ temporarily blind us. Think about St. Paul being blind on his way to the city to persecute Christians. Think about St. Ignatius of Loyola's convalescence. Think about St. Augustine's months of torturous conversion. The silence that we cultivate in these coming days, these last few days of Lent, the sacred images that we see veiled, remind us that they are not the reality that they express, they are signs. They are in service of that greater reality, those aspects of our faith. And the veiling reminds us that any representation, however abstract, however realistic it might be, is limited. Whatever is revealed, there is something else that is lost. And there are times in our lives where we must let Christ blind us for a time so that he can reveal the truth to us, so that we can see with his light. As we come forward to receive the body and the blood of Christ and begin these final few days of Lent, may we be silent. May we be blinded so that we may see anew with the light of Christ.